February 22nd, 1945. 11:42 in the morning. An altitude of 32,000 feet above the frozen, snow-dusted earth of northern Germany. The air here is a different element, thin and brutal, a razor-sharp cold that seeps through steel, leather, and bone. The world outside the plexiglass canopy is a stark canvas of blinding white clouds below and an endless, terrifyingly clear cobalt blue above. But this sky, this beautiful, terrible void, is not empty. It is a cathedral of violence. For the bomber crews of the 15th Air Force, this is the deepest circle of hell. Their target is the sprawling synthetic oil refinery at Ruhland, a critical artery pumping the last lifeblood of the German war machine. To reach it, they must fly a perfectly straight line through hundreds of miles of the most heavily defended airspace on the planet, a corridor of death patrolled by the desperate, expert remnants of the Luftwaffe. They are lumbering giants, B-17 flying fortresses, packed to the brim with high-octane aviation fuel, thousands of pounds of high explosives, and 10-man crews who know the odds are not in their favor. They are slow, they are tragically vulnerable, and today they are dying at an alarming rate. In the cramped cockpit of his P-51 Mustang, a fighter plane he has nicknamed the Calculated Risk, First Lieutenant Elias Vance can taste the metallic tang of fear and adrenaline in the dry, recycled oxygen feeding through his mask. Below and ahead of him, the bomber stream, the great combat box formation designed for mutual defense, is hemorrhaging aircraft and men. It's a scene from a nightmare, painted in fire and smoke across the canvas of the sky. He watches, helpless as a B-17 from the lead squadron, its number 4 engine trailing a greasy, black plume of smoke, begins a slow, sickening, unrecoverable spiral toward the earth. There is a terrible grace to its fall. No parachutes emerge. 10 men, a farmer from Iowa, a student from Ohio, a factory worker from Detroit, erased from the world in a matter of seconds. Almost immediately, another fortress, its entire tail section shredded and torn away by a volley of 20mm cannon fire, simply disintegrates in a brilliant, silent flash of orange and black. The problem is not a lack of courage. The American pilots have courage in abundance. The problem is doctrine. The American fighter groups assigned to the vital, life-or-death task of protecting these bombers operate under a simple, aggressive, and deeply ingrained creed: seek and destroy the Luftwaffe wherever it can be found. It is a doctrine that breathes aces, creates heroes, and generates thrilling headlines back home. But it is a doctrine that is, on this cold February day, failing to save the bombers. The fighter pilots, lured by the siren song of a kill, a victory roll over the airfield, and another black swastika painted on their fuselage, would frequently abandon their close escort positions, pushing their throttles to the firewall to chase a distant flight of German fighters, leaving the lumbering bombers they were sworn to protect dangerously exposed. This created gaps. And through these gaps, the wolves poured in. Today, the wolves are the apex predators of the sky, the expert hunters of Jagdgeschwader 7, flying the revolutionary Messerschmitt Me-262, the world's first operational jet fighter. They are ghosts of metal and fire, appearing with an impossible, terrifying speed, striking with overwhelming force, and vanishing before the propeller-driven P-51 Mustangs can even begin to react. They are the future of warfare, and they are savaging the present. The radio in Vance's helmet crackles with the calm, clipped voice of Group Command, a voice that seems a universe away from the immediate carnage in the sky. It is the standing order, the fighter pilot's gospel, the very foundation of their tactical philosophy. All Red Tail squadrons, you are cleared to engage enemy aircraft at will. Detach and pursue. I repeat, detach and pursue. It is an order built on the cult of aggression. An order that has, for 3 bloody years of war, defined the American fighter pilot as an individual hunter, a knight of the air. It is a direct command to go and chase glory.
But Elias Vance is not looking for glory. He is looking at his fuel gauge, a needle ticking down the precious minutes he can remain in the fight. He is looking at the dwindling number of bombers in the box, a formation visibly shrinking before his eyes. And then he looks at his own flight of 4 Mustangs, their tails painted a defiant, declarative red, a color that makes them both a target and a statement. Inside his thick leather glove, his hand rests on the throttle, a hair's breadth from pushing it forward into the inferno. His squadron, the 302nd Fighter Squadron of the 332nd Fighter Group, is one of the last coherent lines of defense for this particular beleaguered bomber group. The other escort groups, the celebrated, high-scoring P-51 units, have already scattered, drawn down into swirling, chaotic dogfights thousands of feet below, chasing the very decoys the Luftwaffe had masterfully sent to pull them away from the real prize. Vance sees them now. A flight of 4 Me-262 jets, materializing like sharks from the deep blue. They are not attacking the bombers, not yet. They are deliberately presenting themselves, flying a parallel course just outside of effective machine gun range. Their new jet engines leaving 4 thin, perfectly straight white contrails. It is a calculated challenge. It is exquisitely tempting bait. It is a personal invitation from the Luftwaffe's elite to the mocked Red Tails to come and play, to prove their worth in a duel of champions. His wingmen see it too. The radio clicks, the voice of Lieutenant Marcus Hotshot Jones, sharp with adrenaline. "Leader, this is Hotshot. Bandits at 3 o'clock, fat, dumb, and happy. Let's take 'em. We can get 'em before they know what hit 'em." The voice is young, hungry, straining at the leash of command. This is the moment, the point of no return. Every instinct in his body, every ounce of his training, every headline he has ever read screams at him to push the throttle forward, to drop his plane's nose and lead his men in a glorious, head-on charge against the future of aerial warfare. It is his chance to become an ace, to prove once and for all that a black pilot from the segregated fields of Tuskegee, Alabama, can outfly and outfight the most advanced aircraft in the world. It is the order. It is the culture. It is the expectation. But Elias Vance is not looking at the German jets as a pilot. He is looking at them as a mathematician. He is not seeing 4 targets of opportunity. He is seeing an equation, a complex, multivariable problem involving vectors, fuel consumption, and probability. And the logical, inescapable solution to that equation is not to attack. He keys his microphone, his voice unnaturally calm in the swirling storm of chaos and death. "Negative, Hotshot. All Red Tail elements. Form up on me. Tighten the screen. We're sticking with the big friends." A beat of stunned, incredulous silence on the channel. Then the protest laced with disbelief. "But sir, they're right there. It's a textbook bounce. We can take 'em." Vance's response is ice. It is absolute. "Our job isn't to shoot down jets today, Lieutenant. Our job is to make sure those bombers don't get shot down. Hold your formation." It is a quiet, simple transmission. Barely a few seconds of radio time. But in the context of the air war of 1945, it is the act of supreme, almost unthinkable defiance. It is the rejection of the cult of the ace in favor of the duty of the protector. It is the deliberate deployment of a forbidden, unwritten tactic, unwavering, absolute defensive discipline. For a fighter pilot in World War II, it was the ultimate gamble, a bet that his career, his reputation, and the very lives of the bomber crews depended not on the kills he made, but on the kills he pointedly refused to make.
To understand the radical, almost heretical nature of Elias Vance's decision at 32,000 feet, you must first understand the man. And to understand the man, you must understand the world that shaped him. He was not born a warrior, not in the traditional sense. He was born a thinker, a quiet, methodical observer of a world that, to him, rarely made logical sense. He grew up in the red clay dust and stifling humidity of rural Alabama, the only son of a high school mathematics teacher who saw numbers as a form of salvation. His father taught him that algebra and geometry were the only truly universal truths in a world fractured and distorted by the irrationalities of prejudice. While other boys were throwing baseballs and dreaming of heroes, Elias was lost in the elegant, unassailable certainties of geometric proofs and the infinite, ordered possibilities of calculus. Numbers didn't lie. Numbers didn't have an opinion. Numbers couldn't hate you for the color of your skin. He was a third-year mathematics student on a full scholarship at the prestigious Tuskegee Institute when the war came to America. He had no particular love of flying, no burning desire for adventure or glory. He was drawn to the physics of it, the intricate, beautiful interplay of vectors, thrust, lift, and drag. In his mind, a dogfight was not a chaotic, desperate dance of death. It was a three-dimensional chess match governed by immutable laws of energy management and geometry. He held a core belief that any problem, no matter how complex or terrifying, could be analyzed, understood, and ultimately solved if you could only identify its underlying structure. The Tuskegee Army Airfield, a place of immense pride and crushing pressure for Black America, became his laboratory. The cockpit of a P-40 Warhawk, and later the magnificent P-51 Mustang, became his chalkboard. He was not the most naturally gifted pilot in his class. There were others like Hotshot Jones who were more instinctive, more aggressive, more at one with their machines. But no one, not a single pilot, was more precise. He could fly a perfect formation for hours on end, maintain a constant speed down to the knot, and calculate his fuel consumption with an unnerving, almost supernatural accuracy that both baffled and impressed his instructors. They saw it as a strange academic quirk. He saw it as the fundamental foundation of victory. This quiet, academic approach to warfare was forged in the crucible of a national crisis. By late 1944 and early 1945, the American strategic bombing campaign against the heart of Germany was on the verge of catastrophic failure. The mighty 8th Air Force, flying from England, and the 15th Air Force, flying from Italy, were suffering unsustainable losses in both aircraft and trained crews. Bomber crews were being sent on missions with a horrifyingly low probability of completing their 25-mission tour. The reason was simple and brutal. The Luftwaffe was winning the war of attrition in the skies over the Reich. German fighter pilots were masters of their craft, flying excellent aircraft like the heavily armed Focke-Wulf 190 and the nimble Messerschmitt 110. Their strategy was as brilliant as it was brutal. They would send up waves of fighters to act as bait, deliberately luring the American P-51 Mustang and P-47 Thunderbolt escorts into sprawling, fuel-guzzling dogfights far from the vulnerable bomber stream. Once the little friends were engaged and pulled away, a second, more experienced wave of German fighters, the dreaded Sturmgruppen, storm groups, would sweep in to attack the now defenseless bombers with cannons, rockets, and even aerial bombs.
American Fighter Command, obsessed with creating aces and racking up high kill counts to boost morale back home, inadvertently played right into the Luftwaffe's hands. The prevailing doctrine was relentlessly offensive. Fighter groups were encouraged to be free hunting, to roam far ahead of the bombers and clear the skies of any and all opposition. But this often meant they were miles away, sometimes even Winchester, out of ammunition, when the real, decisive attack came. The result was a sky littered with the burning wrecks of B-17s and B-24 Liberators. Into this strategic nightmare stepped the 332nd Fighter Group, the Tuskegee Airmen. Stationed at the muddy, windswept airfield of Ramitelli, Italy, they were, to many in the strictly segregated United States Army Air Forces, a controversial and highly scrutinized social experiment. They were subject to an intense level of oversight that no white unit had to endure. Their every move was watched, their every mistake magnified, their every success quietly downplayed. Their commanding officer, Colonel Benjamin O. Davis, Jr., a stoic and brilliant leader and a graduate of West Point who had been completely ostracized by his white classmate for 4 years, knew that his men had absolutely no margin for error. He instilled in them a philosophy born of this harsh reality. They could not afford to be merely good. They had to be perfect. And for an escort pilot, Colonel Davis drilled into them, perfection was not measured in kills. It was measured in the number of bombers that made it safely home. This unique ethos was the lifeblood of Lieutenant Vance's squadron. His was a small, tight-knit family, a microcosm of Black America. Scholars, farmers, jazz musicians, thrust into the lethal skies of Europe. His wingman was Second Lieutenant Samuel Deacon Rivers, a soft-spoken, deeply religious former preacher's son from Georgia, whose preternatural calmness in the heat of combat was legendary. He was the Rock, the man who would hold formation no matter what. Then there was Second Lieutenant Marcus Hotshot Jones, a cocky, prodigiously brilliant young pilot from the south side of Chicago who flew his Mustang with a jazz musician's improvisational flair. He was all instinct and fire, constantly chafing under Vance's cool, methodical command, hungry to prove he was the best pilot in the sky. And leading their flight was Captain Miller Pops Thompson, a man in his late 20s who felt ancient to the teenagers and college kids around him. He was the steady hand, the voice of experience who had seen too many friends fall from the sky, and whose quiet caution was often the only thing that tempered Hotshot's aggression. Their entire existence was a paradox. On the ground in Italy, they faced the familiar sting of segregation, often treated as second-class soldiers by the very army they served. In the air, they were tasked with the sacred duty of protecting the lives of the all-white bomber crews, who, in many cases, had never spoken to a black man in their lives, and who often held the same prejudices as the society they had all left behind. They were fighting 2 wars simultaneously, one against the formidable military machine of the Third Reich, and another, more insidious war against the prejudice that questioned their skill, their intelligence, and their very right to be there. Back in the skies over Germany, the situation was deteriorating by the second. The radio traffic was a symphony of rising panic. "Mayday! Mayday! We're hit! Number 3 engine is on fire! We're going down! God, we're going—" The transmission cut to static. "Bandits in 6 o'clock high! 6 o'clock! Where are the little friends? God damn it, where is our escort?" Vance listened, his knuckles white on the control stick, forcing himself to remain detached, to analyze. Pops Thompson's voice came over the command channel, calm but audibly strained. "Eli, command is asking for a status update. The lead bomber group is getting chewed to pieces. They've lost 3 more. The 4 Me-262 jets were still there, pacing them, taunting them, their presence a constant pressing temptation. Hotshot Jones couldn't take it anymore. His voice crackled with fury and frustration. "Leader, this is insane. We're just sitting here watching them get slaughtered. Let us go. We can break them up, scatter them. It's what we're trained to do." Vance knew Jones was right in a way.
The instinct to attack was a physical force, a primal scream in his own mind. It felt like the only possible, honorable response to the slaughter unfolding before him. The official plan, the doctrine of aggressive pursuit, had catastrophically failed. The promised reinforcements from other groups were nowhere in sight. Time was not running out. It was gone. They were alone. And he had to make a choice that went against everything a fighter pilot was supposed to be. A choice that could get him court-martialed for cowardice, but one that his cold mathematical logic told him was the only path to victory.
This was the precise moment where the mathematician fully took control from the pilot. In his mind's eye, Elias Vance was not seeing 4 German jets. He was seeing a geometry problem that needed to be solved in 3 dimensions, at a combined speed of over 1,000 miles per hour. He had obsessively studied the Luftwaffe's attack patterns for months, poring over after-action reports in the dim light of a tent, drawing diagrams in the dirt with a stick, running calculations on vectors and fuel consumption in his head until he fell asleep. While other pilots spent their precious free time playing cards, listening to the radio, or trying to forget the horrors of the sky, Vance was fighting the war on paper, tirelessly searching for the hidden logic, the predictable pattern behind the terrifying chaos of air combat. And he had found it. The aha moment, the intellectual spark, had come weeks earlier during a late-night debriefing of a mission that had gone terribly wrong. He noticed a consistent, critical detail that everyone else had missed. The German Sturmgruppen, the heavy bomber-killer units, almost never attacked from a single direction. They used sophisticated, coordinated, multi-axis attacks from different altitudes and azimuths, a tactic designed specifically to split the bomber's defensive machine gun fire, making it less effective. The new jet fighters, the Me-262s, were a new, terrifyingly effective part of this deadly equation. Their incredible speed allowed them to act as the perfect sheepdogs, herding the American escort fighters away from the flock, creating the fatal openings for the slower, more heavily armed Focke-Wulf F-190s to strike with impunity. The Germans, Vance realized, were not just attacking bombers. They were attacking the integrity of the formation itself. They were weaponizing chaos, intentionally breaking the bonds of mutual support that kept the combat box alive. Vance concluded that the American response, a reactive, glory-seeking pursuit of individual kills, was fundamentally, catastrophically wrong. It was like trying to stop a flood by catching one bucket of water at a time. The real solution was not to kill the individual enemy pilot. The solution was to deny the enemy the geometry of their attack. Hot shot? Deacon? Pops? Vance's voice cut through the radio static, sharp, clear, and imbued with an authority that left no room for argument. Listen to me, all of you. We are not engaging. We are not chasing. We are going to build a wall, a moving wall of red tails. His plan was, on the surface, deceptively simple, yet in its soul, it was a complete and utter repudiation of established aerial combat doctrine. He ordered his 12-plane squadron to break into 3 distinct flights of 4 aircraft. Instead of operating as a single, powerful fist designed to punch a hole in the enemy, they would become a series of mobile shields, a flexible, weaving screen of defensive power. Flight 1, he commanded, his words precise and clipped. You take the high ground, 500 feet above the lead bomber box. Your patrol area is a shallow arc from 10 o'clock to 2 o'clock. Do not,
I repeat, do not allow yourselves to be drawn past the lead bomber. Flight 2, you take the low ground, same patrol pattern mirrored below. Flight 3, you're with me. We will weave directly through the formation, plugging any gap we see, no matter how small. It was a strategy of pure, unadulterated, defensive interference. They would not be hunters. They would be sheepdogs. Their primary weapon would not be their 6.5 caliber machine guns. It would be the constant, menacing presence of their P-51s, the omnipresent threat they posed, their disciplined willingness to get in the way. "But sir," Hotshot Jones pleaded one last time, his voice a mix of frustration and disbelief, "we won't get any kills this way. They'll laugh us out of the sky." "We're not here for kills today, Lieutenant," Vance snapped back, the ice in his voice finally cracking into steel. "We are here to get these men home. Execute, now." The execution began, a beautiful and terrifying piece of aerial choreography. Vance led his own flight of 4 Mustangs in a gentle, weaving S pattern through the very heart of the vast bomber formation. They flew perilously close to the giant B-17s, their wingtips seeming to almost brush the massive fuselages as they passed. The bomber crews, accustomed to seeing their escorts as distant, unreliable specks in the sky, were stunned. They looked out of their waist gun positions and cockpit windows and saw the flash of red on the fighters' tails, saw the determined, focused faces of the pilots in the cockpits. For the first time all day, a fragile sense of hope began to bloom in the freezing air. For the first time, they felt like they weren't alone. The psychological impact on the German pilots was immediate, profound, and utterly confusing. From the cockpit of his Me-262, Hauptmann Franz Richter, a 50-kill Luftwaffe ace and a master of high-speed combat, watched this bizarre new tactic unfold with utter disbelief. He had personally planned and led his flight of jets on this perfect bait run, fully expecting the American fighters to charge them head-on, as they always, predictably, did. He was prepared for a high-speed, vertical dogfight, a glorious contest of skill and nerve against the famed Mustang. He was not prepared for this.
The red-tailed Mustangs were simply ignoring him. They flatly refused the duel. Instead, they were forming a tight, disciplined, constantly shifting screen around the bombers, a moving cage of steel that presented no clear, safe opening for an attack. Richter watched with growing frustration as a flight of heavily armed FW-190s, the main attack force, began their run on the bombers from the 6 o'clock low position, the bombers' traditional blind spot. As if on cue, one of Vance's 4-plane elements, Pops Thompson's flight, detached from its high patrol and dove straight through the German formation. They didn't fire for effect, not in a traditional dogfight. It was a high-speed, disruptive pass, a flash of red and silver designed to cause chaos. But it was enough. The German pilots, focused intently on their bombing run, were forced to break off violently to avoid a mid-air collision. Their carefully arranged, perfectly timed attack was ruined. They cursed in their radios, their voices a stream of angry German, as they regrouped and tried again, this time from a different angle. And again, the same thing happened. This time, Vance's own flight rose to meet them, not in a turning, swirling dogfight, but as a disruptive force, a scalpel slicing through the enemy's approach vector, forcing them to scatter.
They were not trying to shoot the Germans down. They were simply, stubbornly, in the way, forcing them to abort their attacks time and again. From the German perspective, it was maddening. It was like trying to fight a ghost or punch water. These red-tailed pilots were disciplined to a degree they had never before encountered in the American Air Forces. They fought not as individual glory hounds, but as a single, coordinated, thinking entity. They seemed to anticipate every move, to plug every gap before it fully formed. Richter and his jet pilots made several high-speed slashing passes, trying to draw them off, firing speculative bursts from their heavy cannons. But the red-tails refused to be baited. They would turn to meet the threat, force the less maneuverable jets to overshoot with their own superior turning ability, and then immediately, without hesitation, return to their defensive positions. They conceded the wider sky, but they absolutely held the formation. The mockery that had filled the German radio channels an hour ago, the arrogant jokes about the Schweizer Vogelmenschen, turned to frustrated, angry, and eventually silent disbelief. For the American bomber crews, the change was nothing short of a miracle. The relentless, terrifying, multi-pronged attacks that had been tearing their formation to pieces for the past hour began to subside, then almost completely stop. The German fighters were still out there, circling like frustrated sharks just out of range, but they could no longer get through the protective screen. The defensive machine gun fire from the bombers became more coordinated, more focused, more effective, as they no longer had to respond to attacks from multiple directions at once. The great bomber stream, which had been on the verge of complete collapse, slowly, painfully, began to stabilize. They had lost 8 bombers before the Red-Tails implemented their radical new strategy. In the 45 minutes that followed, a lifetime in the air, they did not lose another. As the bombers reached their target and dropped their thousands of pounds of ordnance on the smoking Ruland refinery, Vance's squadron was still there, a swarm of guardian angels with brilliant red tails. Their fuel gauges were now dangerously low, the needles bumping against the red line. With the bombers now past the point of maximum danger, Vance gave the order to reform the squadron and head for the long flight home to Italy. They had fired their guns, but they claimed only 2 confirmed kills and 1 probable among the 12 of them, an abysmal statistic for a fighter squadron on a major escort mission. But as they turned for home, a new voice, an unauthorized voice, came over the radio, cutting through the official chatter. It was the lead bomber pilot of the group they had just saved. "Unknown red-tail leader," the voice said, thick with emotion and the strain of combat. "I don't know who you are, but you saw our smoke all the way to the ground today. We're buying the drinks tonight, all of you. God bless you." That night, in the smoky makeshift officers' clubs of the 15th Air Forces, the legend of the Red-Tails began to spread. But it wasn't a legend of kills and aces. It was a different, more powerful kind of story. Bomber crews spoke in hushed, reverent tones of the escorts who never left. The Germans, in their own debriefings, reported a strange, unexpectedly large force of American fighters, perhaps an entire wing, who used strange, coordinated, purely defensive tactics and refused to engage in traditional combat. They had faced a phantom screen, a ghost squadron that was everywhere at once. The legend was born not just from what the Red-Tails did, but from the brilliant, unintentional deception their discipline had created.
The landing back at the muddy Ramatelli airfield was a study in muted contrasts. The ground crews, accustomed to rushing out to count the freshly painted swastika kill markings on returning planes, saw almost none. By the raw, brutal, and simple metrics of a fighter base, the mission looked like a spectacular failure. But then, the reports started to filter in from the bomber fields across Italy. While other fighter groups were proudly reporting high kill counts, but quietly admitting to heavy, sometimes catastrophic bomber losses in their sectors, the bomber group escorted by the 332nd was reporting something unheard of, something that sounded like a clerical error, a near-perfect success rate after the Red Tails had taken over their protection. The first and perhaps most meaningful validation came not from command, but from the men who mattered most. As Vance climbed stiffly out of his cockpit, exhausted to his core, a jeep screeched to a halt nearby, skidding in the mud. A bomber captain, his face still smudged with cordite and his eyes wide with adrenaline, jumped out. He was from a different base, a different world, a white officer from Boston who had absolutely no business being on this side of the segregated airfield. He walked straight up to Vance, ignoring the stares of the ground crew. "Are you the leader of that escort?" he asked, his voice rough with fatigue and a profound, overwhelming gratitude. Vance, taken aback by the directness of the approach, simply nodded. "Yes, sir, I am." The captain pulled off his heavy leather glove and extended his bare hand. "My name's Captain McCleary. You bought us time we didn't have. I was in the lead plane of the second box. We watched the whole thing on our 6. I've never seen anything like it. You were a wall, a goddamned red wall. I have 10 men alive right now, drinking foul coffee and complaining about the food, because you were there. Thank you." Vance shook his hand, unsure of what to say. Around them, other bomber crew members who had hitched a ride on the Jeep were approaching the other Red Tail pilots, Hotshot, Deacon, Pops, offering cigarettes, a handshake, a simple, profound nod of thanks. It was a small, quiet, almost surreal moment, away from the prying eyes of the top brass, but for the pilots of the 332nd, it was everything. It was the only validation they had ever truly sought, the only respect that could not be tainted by politics or prejudice. But the official reckoning was still to come. The next morning, Vance was summoned to the makeshift office of a visiting full-bird colonel from 15th Air Force Fighter Command. This colonel, a man named Mitchell, who was known behind his back as Iron Ass Mitchell, was a living legend, a double ace from the early days in the Pacific, a man who believed with religious fervor that the only purpose of a fighter plane was to hunt and kill other fighter planes. He was the very embodiment of the aggressive, glory-seeking doctrine Vance had just so publicly defied. The colonel sat behind a makeshift desk, a neat stack of after-action reports in front of him. He did not offer Vance a seat.
"Lieutenant," he began, his voice cold and clipped like the rattle of a machine gun. "I've been reviewing the after-action reports from yesterday's mission. The other P-51 groups, the 52nd and the 31st, are reporting a combined total of over 50 enemy aircraft destroyed. A banner day. Your group, the 332nd, is claiming 5. 5! He let the word hang in the air like an indictment. Furthermore, Lieutenant, multiple pilots from the 381st Group reported seeing your squadrons deliberately refusing to engage enemy aircraft, including the new jets. What do you have to say for yourself, Lieutenant? Were your men afraid to fight?" The accusation was a physical blow, a direct and venomous attack on their courage, the one thing that had never been in doubt. Vance stood rigid, his jaw tight, the anger a hot flash in his chest. This was the moment he had dreaded, the inevitable confrontation with the very culture that saw his calculated discipline as simple cowardice. He took a slow, deliberate breath, meeting the colonel's icy glare head-on. His defense was not an excuse, It was not an apology. It was a simple, irrefutable statement of battlefield logic. "No, sir," Vance said, his voice steady and level, betraying none of the fury he felt. "We were not afraid to fight. We were ordered to escort the 47th Bombardment Wing. Our primary mission, as we understood it, was the survival of that wing, not the attrition of the Luftwaffe." The colonel scoffed, a dismissive, ugly sound. "Your mission is to destroy the enemy, Lieutenant. That is the only mission. You get the bombers a clear path by eliminating any and all threats." "Yes, sir," Vance replied, pressing on with his cold, mathematical argument. "And we determined that the greatest threat to the bombers yesterday was not the presence of German fighters, but the absence of American ones. The other groups were drawn down, away from the stream. We chose to counter that primary threat directly. We placed our aircraft physically between the enemy's cannons and our bombers' fuselages. We broke up their attack runs. We served as a shield, not a sword." He paused, letting his words sink in, seeing a flicker of something other than contempt in the colonel's eyes. "Colonel, may I ask a question, sir?" The colonel, surprised by the lieutenant's audacity, narrowed his eyes. "Go on." "Sir, how many bombers did the 47th Wing lose yesterday after we initiated our close escort tactic?" The colonel was silent. He knew the answer. It was right there in the neatly typed report in front of him. He shuffled the papers, a small, involuntary gesture of discomfort, avoiding Vance's direct gaze. Vance pressed his advantage, his voice still quiet, respectful, but with an unyielding edge of steel. "The answer is 1, sir. They lost one more bomber to a lucky flak hit over the target. The bomber groups being escorted by the squadrons who shot down 50 German planes lost a combined total of 27. 27 heavy bombers, sir. 270 men. We traded ace-making for bomber saving. We believe it was the correct strategic trade, sir." The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the distant sound of an engine test. The colonel stared at the young, black lieutenant, a man he had been ready to brand a coward and send home in disgrace. He was faced with a logic that was as unorthodox as it was mathematically, brutally, undeniably correct. The numbers didn't lie. The mission was a staggering success by the only metric that truly mattered: lives saved, bombs on target. Before the colonel could formulate a response, the tent flap opened. It was Brigadier General Benjamin O. Davis, Jr., the commanding officer of the 332nd. He had been listening quietly from outside. He stepped into the room, his presence radiating a quiet, unassailable authority that seemed to suck the very air out of the tent. "Is there a problem, Colonel?" Davis asked, his voice calm and even. The visiting colonel, Iron-Ass Mitchell, looked from the defiant young lieutenant to the formidable general, and in that moment he knew he had lost. He was facing a different kind of army, a different breed of warrior, forged in a fire he could not comprehend. "No, General," Mitchell said, his voice tight with a grudging, newfound respect. "No problem. Lieutenant Vance was just explaining his tactics." He picked up the reports and tapped them neatly on the desk. "Carry on, Lieutenant." It was a quiet, unceremonious, but total vindication. There would be no medal for what Vance did that day, no public praise. His reward was far more significant and lasting. Within days, a new directive, carefully worded, came down from 15th Air Force headquarters. While still encouraging aggression, it placed a new, explicit emphasis on maintaining escort integrity at all costs. Bomber groups, whose crews now spoke of the 332nd with a kind of religious reverence, began specifically requesting the red-tail bastards, the very pilots who had been mocked and doubted for so long. They had earned the one thing they could not be given by command: the absolute, unqualified trust of the men they were sent to protect. They had proven, in the lethal laboratory of the sky, that the surest path to victory was not always the most glorious one.
What happened in the frozen contrail-laced skies over Germany on February 22, 1945, was more than just a single successful mission. It was a proof of concept, a successful, radical experiment conducted under the most extreme pressure imaginable. Elias Vance's wall of red tails was an idea born of mathematical precision, honed by the unique pressures of the Tuskegee experience, and executed out of a desperate need to prove his men's worth in the only way that mattered. And it worked. It worked so spectacularly well that it could not be ignored. The ultimate proof of genius in any field is not praise, it is imitation. In the final, brutal, bloody months of the war in Europe, the top brass of the United States Air Army Forces, men like General Jimmy Doolittle and General Carl Spaatz, began to quietly but intently study the tactics of the 332nd Fighter Group. They analyzed the after-action reports, they cross-referenced them with bomber loss statistics, and they noted the astoundingly, almost impossibly low loss rates for the bomber groups they escorted. They came to an unavoidable paradigm-shifting conclusion. The Tuskegee Airmen, the men from the experiment, had been right all along. The glory-seeking, free-hunting doctrine that had created so many famous aces had also created far too many widows and grieving mothers back home. The air war, they now realized, was no longer about individual duels between knights of the sky. It was a war of industrial attrition, and its goal was to protect the assets that would actually bring the Third Reich to its knees, the strategic heavy bombers. The unofficial defiant tactic of Lieutenant Vance and his squadron was quietly codified, studied, and integrated into official military doctrine. It was given a dry, technical name, stripped of all its drama and emotion: close proximity escort discipline. A fancy, bureaucratic term for a deceptively simple, revolutionary idea. Stay with the bombers. The red tail method, born of necessity and defiance, became the new gospel for all fighter escort groups in the 15th Air Force, and its principles were quickly adopted by the mighty 8th in England as well. The Tuskegee Airmen had not just won a battle. They had fundamentally changed the philosophy of the entire American air war. The validation for this legacy came not just from military planners and rewritten training manuals, but from the men in the flak-battered fuselages of the B-17s and B-24s. Their letters and diaries, now archived and collecting dust in museums and university libraries, are a powerful personal testament to the impact of the 332nd. Second Lieutenant David Williams, a navigator in the 483rd Bomb Group, who flew 30 missions, wrote in a letter to his wife dated March 24, 1945, a mission to Berlin. "Today we went to the Big B, Berlin. The flak was the worst I've ever seen, a sky full of black puffs of death. And the sky was buzzing with Kraut fighters. But we had the red tails with us. It's funny, you feel different when you see them show up. They don't wander off. They don't go chasing ghosts. They stick to you like glue. You see them weaving in and out of the formation, always there, always between you and the bad guys. It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. We lost planes today, good men, but I swear on my life it would have been a massacre without them. I don't know any of their names, but I know the color of their tails. To us, that color means life."
First Lieutenant Michael O'Connell, a B-17 pilot with the 97th Bomb Group, stated in an official debriefing report now declassified, "The 332nd are the best I've ever seen. They have a discipline unlike any other group I have flown with. They are not interested in personal glory. They are interested in us. They understand the mission. Request them for all future deep penetration missions." This reputation, the best in the business, whispered from one bomber crew to another, was their true, untarnishable victory. It was a victory earned in blood and discipline, a testament to a standard of excellence born from the fires of adversity and the cold logic of a mathematician. When the war in Europe finally ended, Elias Vance came home. There was no parade for him through the streets of his Alabama hometown. There were no newspaper headlines celebrating the quiet intellectual hero who had revolutionized air combat doctrine. He came home to a nation that had not yet decided if he was a hero or a second-class citizen. A nation that would ask him to save it, but not to sit beside it at a lunch counter. He quietly took off his uniform, with its captain's bars and its distinguished flying cross, packed away the memories of the flak-filled skies, and returned to his first true love, numbers. He finished his degree and then became a high school mathematics teacher, just like his father. For 30 years, he taught algebra, geometry, and trigonometry to generations of students who had no idea that their quiet, patient, soft-spoken teacher had once painted complex equations across the sky at 400 miles per hour, holding the lives of hundreds of men in his hands. He was an unsung genius, his battlefield brilliance a quiet secret he carried with him every day. The emotional climax of his story, the true, deeply personal reason for his defiance, was not revealed until decades later. In a letter to his own son who was considering applying to the new Integrated Air Force Academy in 1978, Vance finally explained the choice he made that day. The letter, a fragile, yellowed piece of paper now part of the U.S. Army Heritage and Education Center collection, reads in part, "Son, you asked me if I was ever scared up there. The truth is, I was scared every minute of every day. But it's important you understand what I was scared of. It wasn't just of the Germans, of their cannons or their skill. I was scared of failing. We all were. We carried more than just our own lives on our shoulders up there. We carried the weight, the hopes, the dreams of 16 million black people in America. Every bomber we lost was a mark against us. Every mistake was seen as proof that the experiment had failed, that we weren't good enough. The other fighter pilots, the white pilots, they were fighting for America, and we were too, but we were also fighting for our right to fight for America. There is a difference. That day you read about in the history books, the day we let the German jets go, my pilots were furious with me. They wanted the glory, they wanted the kills, and I don't blame them for a second. But I knew something they didn't, or maybe couldn't allow themselves to see in that moment. I knew that glory was a trap, set for us by our enemies and, in a way, by our allies too. Our real victory wouldn't be measured in the number of swastikas we painted on our planes. Our victory would be measured in the number of white bomber crews who went home to their families and said, "The Red Tails saved us today." That was the only headline that could win our war. Our discipline had to be our primary weapon. It was our protest. It was our silent, screaming answer to every person who ever said we were inferior, undisciplined, or incapable. We didn't have to be the flashiest. We didn't have to be the highest scoring. We just had to be the absolute best at the job we were given. We had to be flawless. That day, the battlefield taught me something no textbook, no flight manual ever could. The only way to win the war we were truly fighting was to refuse to play their game. We had to invent our own. And maybe that is the real and enduring lesson of the Tuskegee Airmen. Their story is not just about courage in the face of a foreign enemy, but about the profound genius of restraint in a world that lionizes aggression. It's a powerful reminder that true strength often lies not in the charge, but in the steadfastness of the shield, in the discipline to do not what is glorious, but what is right and what is necessary. The Red Tails racked up over 100 aerial victories. They destroyed hundreds of enemy targets on the ground. They earned a distinguished unit a citation for their incredible performance. But their greatest achievement, their most lasting legacy, was the one that never made the headlines. It was the quiet, unwavering promise they made and kept to the bomber crews of the 15th Air Force. We will not leave you. True courage isn't always measured in enemies destroyed, but in lives delivered from the fire.